Wait.
Hello and welcome everyone to the full moon in Gemini, and I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin.
I'm Armand Diaz on Long Island.
Now, Armand, this is a really important full moon for lots of reasons, isn't it? I mean, it's the last full moon of the year, so there's something very significant about, this last big full moon that is really bringing up, it's like the last attempt to drag up those unconscious feelings, into some kind of level of consciousness before we bring the year to a close. So that's one of the reasons.
It's right before the solstice, of course, right? So that, this is the turning point of the year. And it is a sort of clearing out. I think it's a really good point. The full moon before the end of the year, it is a kind of point where we sort of clear out and we sort of look back over the past year and see what's gone on and bring things up and out. Yes, very much so.
And just to very quickly mention that our term 2 of our course is starting next term, and we're going to be covering synastry and composite charts. So if anybody didn't sign up for term 1, you're still in time to sign up for term 2 as a standalone term. So I just wanted to make sure, since we're coming to the end of the term, that we mentioned that.
And actually, we're coming to the end of the year, and actually you can catch a video about it on our YouTube channel. So if you go to click the relationships in astrology, and you can go watch the trailer video for our course.
So what do you think about this full moon? It's a full moon in Gemini, and Gemini is always about communication. So in terms of relationships, there's some kind of link to communication, but it forms a T-square. I mean, the sun-moon opposition forms a T-square to Neptune. So we've got this very intellectual moon that is kind of split between, there's the two aspects to it. I always think of the twins, like the light and the dark twin. And then when it's squaring Neptune, there's also, fogginess, confusion, thrown into the mix. And because it's a T-square, because Neptune is the apex, it's really a very important planet. So it feels there's a lot of emphasis. Plus also Mars is trine Neptune. So there seems to be a lot of Neptunian emphasis going on. And we've got Mercury quincunx Uranus. So, I know I'm jumping on ahead and kind of giving an overall picture, but just to say that there's really a lot of disparate energies going on with this full moon. So what are your thoughts, Armand, for relationships?
Well, jumping ahead and just giving an overall picture with Mercury in Sagittarius, that makes a lot of sense, actually, doesn't it? So you're right on target. Don't worry about it. You're right in tune with things. This is the big picture. Here's the thing. We'll live the details later. You're right. Gemini is a dual sign. Sagittarius is a dual sign. Pisces is a dual sign. So there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of choices. There's a lot of, if it wasn't for the Neptunian aspect of things, I would say that, the full moon, as the Gemini full moon is every year, would be light, playful, a little of this, a little of that. Do we go to the movies? We go to the restaurant type of thing, just sort of open thing. The Neptunian aspect of it fogs things out a little bit, maybe makes it's almost like it's hard to get traction. Gemini wants to go here and then go there type of thing. And Sagittarius is kind of down with that too in its own way. The Neptunian thing could make it a little bit hard to get moving on things. I guess if you wanted to sort of, work the T-square, then the empty leg of it is Virgo, which is, pick a little something to do and do it, just even if it's not the biggest thing, if, just do something that is helpful, do something that is grounded, do something that is a little bit earthy. Maybe that's a little bit of the strategy for us.
And also to be a little discerning, maybe, that with all the Neptunian energy to really just be a little discerning in relationships, be a little discerning about what we say, maybe think it through before we say it, how we are with people, and really kind of see through the fog a little bit, because there's always the potential with Neptune. There's two potentials, I think, with Neptune. There's the extreme of like the unconditional love, that beautiful spiritual sense of connection, of soulmate, of karmic connection, where we could meet somebody where we feel so connected to it at a soul level. And then there's the other side, which can be delusion, it can be betrayal, it can be addictions, it can be really falling into those kind of murkier sides of Neptune. So that's where Virgo comes in with the discernment, I think.
course, you got to bring your own. Now, the other thing that's happening, though, we have this full moon that is very ambiguous. It seems to have a lot of potentials and so on. And then this week, also, on either side of the full moon, Venus is meeting with Saturn and Pluto, right? And so, and while the full moon may suggest, things are up in the air. I would say that would be a good description for this full moon. Things are up in the air. Venus, who's out of bounds, by the way, beyond the limits of the sun's path, Venus out of bounds is meeting with Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, and that seems to demand a decision when it comes to relationships. It seems to, well, what are we doing here? What's the bottom line? And this is a conjunction. This is when they actually meet at the same spot. It's not a square or an opposition where it's like a dialogue or tension. This is the beginning of the whole cycle for the year. And so, it is a very important time for relationships. And I think relationships that are sort of at a tipping point or hanging in the balance or something like that, there's going to be a need for, okay, what are we doing here? Could be a very good thing. What are we doing here? But it could also be a harsher question. And with this full moon and all its ambiguity, we're getting two different messages from the cosmos at the same time.
I think we are, and just to mention that also we'll be doing a YouTube recording on the transits of 2020 in relationships. Check in between Christmas and New Year. We'll certainly put it out then, because we've had a lot of questions about that. I agree with you, Armand. I think there is, there's different tensions in the air with this full moon. And I think a full moon, which, as you say, could be sort of light and fluffy, really has an intensity and a depth to it, as well as some confusion and ambiguity, because the depth also comes from the quincunx to Pluto, which really pulls that moon in Gemini rather somewhat reluctantly into the underworld. And so our feelings, which really we'd rather kind of process in our mind with the moon in Gemini, we kind of like to work them through and really not go too deep, just to stay up, fairly on the surface. We've no choice. We're pulled down into Hades' realm, into Pele's realm. We're pulled right down into the depths. And so what could happen is that a lot of very deep unconscious material could start bubbling up, and we may not really know quite what to do with it, because we're trying to process it at a head level when actually this is happening at a very deep gut level. And so in relationships, what can happen is that we can seem to interpret something at a head level and have a conversation that seems on the surface, when actually what's going on is there's all these feelings churning underneath that we don't even have words for or expression for, and we could easily act out in a relationship. And so things like, for example, jealousy could come suddenly up when we didn't even realize we were jealous, or that there's any reason to really be jealous. And it's even hard to then figure out, is this about now, or is it about the past? Is this about unresolved issues? So to be very careful in our dealings with others, whether it's family members, because of course we're in holiday season, or work colleagues, people are having office parties and so on. And, and of course with our significant other, what's going on the surface is very different to what's going on underneath, and it may be quite difficult to get a handle on what's going on underneath. So back to that Virgo kind of discernment, taking a deep breath, really thinking through before we kind of jump out with anything or say anything.
Oh yeah, with Mercury in Sagittarius, quincunx to Uranus, we're going to stop and think before we talk. Yeah. Yeah, that's gonna happen. That's gonna happen. Well, but we should give it a try. Also, too, the intensity. This full moon, it's got enough going on without the fact that it is 2 weeks before the eclipse that happens on Christmas Day or the day after, depending where you are.
The day after, I think. Yeah.
It's earliest 26th, latest 25th, depending upon where you are. But we start falling into that eclipse. We start getting sort of pulled into the little black hole or vortex or magnetic sort of pull of the eclipse that will add intensity that continues. Really, is not going away. So there's full moons are jangly times. We get a couple of days past them, we tend to sort of mellow out. This time I'm not so sure. And Margaret, Chiron stations to go direct just a day or so after this, on Friday, which is really, just a day after the full moon. So, all of those things, self-doubt and all of those challenges come up as well.
I think one of the key themes that strikes me about this full moon is that pull between freedom and commitment, that there's so much in this full moon chart, in the energies in the sky, wanting that lightness and freedom, and, I want to do what I want to do. And then the other side that pulls us into, but I really want to know how I stand. What's my security in this relationship? Is this real? Is there any commitment? Are you really going to commit to me? And then underneath, there's all those fears and those insecurities and, old wounds and old stuff going on. So again, we're back to these multiple layers, which, are heightened, particularly during a full moon time. So really kind of just back to being careful. As you say, yes, it's a Mercury in Sagittarius, so it's not easy, but, reread those texts before you send them. Maybe don't send that email until a couple of days later. Just those basic things which are about taking care of ourselves and taking care of our relationships when we know that this is a peak time when things are not what they seem and emotions are heightened.
I always, I increasingly, I look at it as being, when we hit these times, you've got to think to yourself, it's a hard time to make a decision. It's probably a good time to act if you're sure what you want. If you're sure this is where things are going, or this is where you want things to go, it's a good time to act. There's a lot of this. It's not a time to sit still. But, the impulsiveness, just the kind of like, oh, that's it. If I see this, that's it. Oh, forget it. I'm just, we're breaking up. I've had it.
Yeah.
That type of thing is really not a good move. You have to go repair.
Well, I think sometimes people do that and break up relationships just because they feel the need to do something. It's like, this is uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable. And rather than kind of analyzing, well, why am I uncomfortable? Has this anything even to do with the relationship or whatever? It's almost like, well, I'd rather do this and do something because then there's a sense of relief. And then it's hard to pick up the pieces afterwards because often it's too late, in fact. So, when you say be sure, make sure that this is something you've been really thinking about for a very long time, and that even way before the full moon, you knew in your heart and soul that this is the right decision for you. And, we often say this, check in with your heart, really check in with your heart and make sure that this isn't just, from the frustration, that it's really a decision made, with love for yourself and the other person, so that afterwards there are as few regrets as possible.
Yeah, which also, if it, this could also apply to if you're getting closer to somebody, that also has the same type of questions and answers. I agree with you very much, though. This full moon really pushes us towards freedom. And sometimes, even in the midst of a fairly good relationship, you can feel, with Mercury meeting Saturn and Pluto, you can feel hemmed in a bit and sort of want that, I can just go to the store when I want to go to the store. I don't have to tell anybody what I'm doing or anything like that. It can be very appealing, but you don't want to explode a good relationship just because you want to have a few minutes to yourself.
Absolutely. Back to the discernment, how can you create that? How can you build that into the relationship? What, are there other things you can do before doing something very drastic? So I suppose what we're saying is maybe, don't be too drastic with it, and really look after yourself and look after your loved ones, and just know that, these energies are intense overall at the moment because we're building up to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on the 12th of January. So we're in for a holiday time that has a lot of tension. So this feels like really the start of the tensions, and be aware that, we also need to kind of build up our stamina so that we can get through all the holidays with as little stress as possible. So use whatever tools you have to de-stress yourself, and know that we're kind of in for, a good few weeks of this. It's not going to be just the full moon.
Yeah, I think everything we've said really goes across the board for a very couple of weeks, month or so, with different flavors of it. And we'll be back for the flavor of the eclipse in a couple of weeks.
And do check our, our page on Facebook, our daily blogs, because we'll be giving you tips on how to get through the holidays with your loved ones. See you soon, Armand.
Because that's what dealing with it is the PTSD of family relationships.
Yeah, it's that time of year. Absolutely.
I'll see you.
See you soon. Bye, Armand. Bye-bye.